Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. I invite you to scroll through my extensive catalog of more than 120 awesome AA interviews on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. So sit back and enjoy this encore episode of my July 2021 interview with Jane P., whose sobriety date is June 1995. On today's podcast, I want to introduce a recent friend of mine from across the pond in England, Jane P. I first met Jane in early 2020 when I started attending a Zoom meeting originating in London. Her story captivated me, and it's one I want to share in its entirety with my AA brothers and sisters. Given up for adoption at 18 months old by a mother who later committed suicide, Jane was raised by an older, loving couple who never quite understood her preteen drinking or streak of independence, which included running away from home at 14. Early attempts to become a good girl in a Christian youth group gave way to a dark side fueled by emerging alcoholism, wild behavior, and self-harm in the form of cutting. As alcohol and blood flowed over the next years, Jane's foray into London's early punk rock scene preceded a marriage that endured 15 tumultuous years, only to end in divorce. Known to many as Mad Jane, the insanity of the intervening years precipitated her rapid descent toward alcoholic ruin. Fate, however, met her at the edge of the abyss, where she was snagged by the remembered words of a friend who had told her about Alcoholics Anonymous many years earlier. In sheer desperation, Jane flew to the U.S. where her friend helped her find AA. She returned to London with renewed hope and a suggested program of recovery. Though she slipped after a year and a half of her initial efforts, Jane redoubled her efforts, found a good sponsor, worked the steps, and ultimately claimed her current sobriety date over 26 years ago. Through the years, Jane's active involvement in AA has included service to her groups and sponsoring other women. Because her sobriety has been concurrent with abstinence from self-harm and cutting, Jane's unique understanding and empathy related to that disease have been extended to others facing that same mental health issue. It's rare service that goes above and beyond, but is so crucial in these days of multiple addictions. There's a sweet gentleness in Jane's recounting of her life story that's both touching and poignant, but also quite impactful. In many ways, her story illuminates how another realm of addiction can encumber the ability and effort to get and stay sober. After you've listened to the next 60 minutes of AA Recovery Interviews, I think you'll appreciate the wisdom and optimism of my friend and AA sister, Jane P.
I'm Jane. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jane. I so appreciate you doing this today. Of course, you're in Great Britain while I am in the state of Texas.
In Houston.
In Houston, exactly. And you and I had the opportunity to meet on a meeting that we both go to every week during the COVID pandemic. But that was a meeting that you were going to previously and in person when you're there in England?
That's right. That's one of my first meetings. My first main meetings.
Your first main meeting. So how long have you been sober?
26 years.
26 years. And what's your sobriety date?
It's the 21st of June, 1995.
Wow. Congratulations on that. So you just passed your 26th year. I think I heard you share in the meeting where you had your birthday. And while I've only had the opportunity to get to know you through your shares, which basically means about 3 minutes at a time, I knew from hearing what you said in meetings that you were one of those people I definitely wanted to have on the show. How did a nice young lady like you ever show up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? What was going on in your life that made you say, I got to go to AA?
Basically, I got and just so exhausted and so tired out and absolutely broken, finished, done in. And I'd been 12-stepped a couple of years before, and I'd actually been taken to meetings, and I'd got sober a few years before, but I knew nothing of AA, how it worked, and I attended one meeting a week, which had no chairs, had no newcomers in a sense. It was a very small, they called it a gold card meeting, but I was too shy to go to any others. I was too terrified. And I was taken to this, and I went for about 6 months, once a week. I heard a wonderful thing in my first meeting in that room, and that was, this is not your fault. This is a disease. And it seemed to lift everything. Whoa. But the thing was that after 6 months, I got more depressed than anything. Nobody really talked to me after the meeting.
So your first 6 months were not exactly what you thought they would be, huh?
Well, I didn't know what to think.
What was missing for you?
Contact. You know, somebody to show me the ropes. And I was very caught up in myself, so I wouldn't reach out. And then I drank a year after I stopped going to that meeting. Just one tiny quarter glass of wine, but what it set up in me was so violent. Now, also, there'd been other, sort of things leading me to the rooms. One was that I was married at this time, and my ex-husband and I were very young when we married. He was 19.
Wow.
I was 23 and really active alcoholic. He wasn't. Now, he'd grown up, a wonderful, wonderful man, and he was best friends and buddies with my ex-husband's Dan W. And so Woody grew up with Mark. He was younger, 3 years younger. Now, Mark was totally mad. We did so much together, you know, my husband included, but also without my husband. He was sort of mad. He could do everything, tell you he could do it, and he did it, and he would tell people what to do. He's one of these huge characters. And 5 years before, he had gone out to stay with his father and make his own life in Hollywood, because his father was a successful actor. He'd been at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Sure.
And so Mark went out to join him and to pursue a career as an actor. Now, the Mark I had known was wild, drunken, cocaine, everything. And he came back to visit us. And this was a year before I got really sober, the first time. But he came back sober, and he came to dinner with us. And, you know, I'd bought wine. He said, no, I'm fine. I don't drink. And he spoke about Alcoholics Anonymous for I would say, 20 minutes, boof. A little bit about this, a little bit about that. Then we spoke about Michael Chekhov for the next 2 hours.
Sure, okay.
We didn't, you know, it was a light introduction.
I get it.
Now, after my year and a half of sobriety, my ex-husband, who I have to tell you, had been totally devoted to me through all of my madness and my alcoholic behavior. And everything, and there was a lot of madness and violence and infidelity.
Now, this is the husband that you married when he was 19 and you were 23?
Yeah. I met Mark through my ex-husband. He is part of his family unit.
Okay, so for how many years were you and your ex married?
15 years, yes. So I'd known Mark for about 15 years. My ex-husband had been devoted to me. He was obsessed with me,
I see.
If you can understand that. There was obsession there. Yeah. And also, my madness nullified his own cravings. He had been an addict, cocaine, he'd stopped that, he'd stopped smoking. He didn't drink because his father had drank, and he wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
And that's why I think he fell in love with me, because the first time we met, it was backstage, we're both performing, and I was a little bit tipsy after my show, and he fell in love with that. That's what he fell in love with, a little bit of a tipsy woman, a tipsy lady, something he understood.
And this wasn't while he was drinking, right?
No, he never drank.
He never drank, and he was attracted to the tipsy lady.
Yeah, because, he knew it. He understood that.
I get it, sure.
He needed a distraction from his own demons.
I get it, sure.
Because he had grown up in a severely alcoholic home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So after a year and a half of my not drinking, my adoptive mother died, and suddenly he wasn't there. If you know what I mean, he was absent, and he started being really sad and unhappy, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I was in a play at the time, and I drove home that night, and it was late. We'd have to sort of break down the set every night. And I arrived home, and there was just a note. I've gone to John in Bristol, because we live in London. John was like one of his best childhood friends. He'd driven off in the night, and there's me, still working on this play. My mother has just died, and I'm trying to be sober, and he's not been there, and I don't know what's going on. And he had actually, very funnily, had started drinking a wee bit when I stopped, incrementally. And there was a little glass, half a glass of wine in a bottle up in his studio in the attic. And I drank it. And that was the first in 1.5 years. And the feeling it set up in me, the compulsion. But it's 3 o'clock in the morning by this time. Yeah. It was too late to go out, so I didn't drink anymore. But that was blessed.
But that was after 1.5 years of sobriety.
Yeah.
Dry drunks.
Oh, really, quite dry drunk, really. I wasn't doing meetings. I'd stopped going.
How many years into your marriage did this occur?
Oh, this was 15 years. This was 15.
Okay, so this is towards the end of the marriage.
Yeah.
I see.
And so I knew what to do. I think it was God saying it. I picked up the phone and I called Mark in West Hollywood. And I said, Mark, I need to get away. I'm trying to be sober. I've just picked up a drink. And I've been sober like 1.5 years. I need to come and visit you. There's something wrong. I need to get away. And he said, yeah, great, 3 weeks. My ex-husband paid all the fares. He said, yeah, that's a great idea. Because I knew I needed a sober person in my life. Now, Mark, as I said, it was 100% positive energy. I needed...
And this was after he had already given you that 20-minute introduction to AA, just a little hook.
Yeah, a little seed. Yeah.
You knew who to call, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew who to call. I needed to get away, and I needed to go to where I could get sobriety.
Let me ask you something, Jane. You had mentioned that your first 6 months in AA were not particularly great and didn't do much to keep you attracted. Was that the 1.5 years that you were sober, or did you do the 1.5 years without AA at that point?
No, I had the 6 months with AA and then a year without.
So you decided after 6 months with AA into this 1.5 years that you were sober?
I was too scared to go to other meetings.
Yeah. Did people reach out to you, though, during that time? I mean, in the meetings?
No.
So, you know how we go to meetings these days and people are extraordinarily friendly and very good with the newcomers, and they make sure that people get known and get surrounded after a meeting. That didn't happen to you then, huh?
It didn't happen.
Yeah. Huh.
It was a very self-involved group.
Yeah. When I was new in sobriety, Jane, my first year, I was very full of myself. I thought I could do AA on my own. So I would come late and leave early for meetings. I really didn't let people get to know me. I sure as heck didn't reach out. And a lot of people, when you don't reach out, they don't reach back. What frame of mind were you in during that 6 months? Were you just scared?
I was very shy and very scared. And it was the wrong meeting for me.
Yeah.
But that wasn't, I needed something else. And going out to America and staying with Mark, first thing we did, we went to meetings. We went to all of these meetings. And the first meeting that we went to, this guy was at the door and he reached out his hand and he said, hello, I am. And I'm like, whoa. And They blew me away.
Isn't that great?
Goodness, the energy, people laughing and shouting, clapping, whistling, and wonderful, wonderful shares. And you know what? Bam. I will say this about Mark. He had his sponsees they'd call his apartment 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd go out to the coffee house and we'd go and meet them. And I would listen, how he talked, everything he said. It was wonderful. And I really got it. And when I left after 3 weeks, he said, Jane, you go to meetings, you do 90 meetings in 90 days, and you get a sponsor. I said, can't you be of course I can't be your sponsor.
Right.
I'm the wrong sex and I'm the other side of the world.
Right. So after 3 weeks in California where you were hanging with Mark, you were going to all these great groups where people were really friendly and boisterous and just very upbeat, made you think that AA was the place to be. So after 3 weeks, you go back to England.
I fly into Heathrow and my husband is not there. Now, he always met my planes.
Huh.
He would always be there.
He knew you were coming?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
He just didn't show?
He wasn't there waiting, so I grabbed a cab and got it home. And he was at the door when the cab pulled up. And he told me, and it was the day before our 15th wedding anniversary. And he told me, I'm leaving. He's leaving. And the whole of my world rocked. It just fell. He left 2 days later. You know, we slept in the same bed and he held me as I cried. And I hardly stopped crying. He wouldn't tell me why. He just said, I'm leaving. And he took a few things and 2 days later he was gone.
Did you see it coming?
I knew that something was seriously wrong. I didn't expect that. His love had been, albeit obsessive, it was deeply happy love. And even though I was a monster because of my drinking, he stood by me. He was, he really did support me and he was incredible.
So you have firsthand knowledge of how the disease of alcoholism can tear apart a marriage from the inside out, don't you?
Oh, yes.
So he put up with you for a long time until he couldn't put up with you anymore, I guess, huh?
No, it wasn't that.
No, what was it?
It's because I got sober, like 1.5 years, not drinking.
Oh.
His own feelings, his own deep demons began to emerge. And as I say, he incrementally began to drink himself.
That's interesting.
Now, there's this great movie, The Fisher King, and there's a scene in it where Jeff Bridges' lady just sort of confronts him. And she says, I can't go through this. Don't leave me in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
I can't hang on waiting.
Yeah.
You have to tell me now. So 2 weeks later, my ex-husband came to visit and I played him that little extract from the movie. I said, I need to know. I need to know what's happening. And he said, there's another woman. Now, she was in a very dysfunctional relationship. She had a little baby girl. And, you know, all of his needs to be distracted, to give himself over entirely to another being other than himself so that he didn't have to feel his own demons. She became that one. And that's why he had been crying. That's why he had been upset and removed from me, because he didn't love me anymore. And he knew this. All this happened around, you know, like June. That was midsummer. I took that glass of wine.
After 1.5 years.
Yeah. But it had been leading up the month before. It had just been a month or so since May that he met this woman, got involved with her.
Do you think that if you hadn't stopped for that 1.5 years, that might not have occurred?
I've never dwelt on that because I don't know the answer and I prefer my sobriety.
Yeah, I get that.
That is so much more to me than anything.
Okay.
It's everything.
So you go through this after 15 years of marriage. Did you get divorced at that point?
We got that in motion. But for the immediate 2 weeks afterwards, I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I cried. And then off I went. Now, the meeting I had gone to, I thought that was no good.
Right.
I had a little where to find, and I looked through, and they had a meeting on a Sunday.
Uh-huh.
And it said, Joys of Recovery. And I thought, that's what I want, the joys of recovery. Because that sounds, the American way.
Oh,
let's sing and shout.
Yeah.
English meetings are not quite so hectic and wild.
They're pretty reserved, I've noticed.
Pretty reserved. But it was good.
Huh.
And I met good people there. And I did 1990. That's all I had.
So you're following Mark's advice, weren't you?
Yeah, I didn't need to work. I was blessed with that. My ex-husband made sure I had some money, and I had money in an account. So I didn't need to work. And for 2 years, I went to the 1990. If I found a meeting that I didn't really like, I'd go back the next week, just in case.
Yeah.
But I found all the meetings that I really did love.
In Al-Anon, they have a thing that says, we suggest that you give us 6 meetings, because the first meeting you go to might not be exactly what you were looking for. The second meeting might be a little bit more towards your liking. By the time you've gone to 4 to 6 meetings, you can judge whether or not you want to be here long term. Have you ever found that to be the case?
I gave them 2. And if they still served me big mug of tea with sugar in it, forget it. I don't take sugar in my tea, babe.
That's enough of a reason to stop going to a meeting right there. Yeah,
I don't drink sugar, baby. Oh, you need the sugar. No, I don't, babes. I don't drink sugar in my tea.
Another addiction. So you were going to these meetings. You were doing 90 and 90 for the first 2 years. You were pretty much a daily meeting goer during that time?
Yeah, there's so many meetings in London. I mean, it's a smorgasbord.
Did you get yourself a sponsor during that time?
Well, do you know, it's another thing I learnt was hand it over, God's will. I got that very strongly from Mark. And it was, thy will be done. Every morning I would pray for a sponsor.
Yeah.
And I said, if it's thy will, poof, that will do. And I would ask. I did ask. And I didn't know who to ask. I had no judgment.
Yeah.
And, 6 ladies said no.
Huh.
Yeah, before one said yes.
Yeah.
And she was lovely. She was Finnish. And then she went back to Finland. So I had to ask again. Now I had 18 months in sobriety. So I was pretty cool. And there was this wonderful, wonderful woman. Oh, she always sat at the front in the meeting. She had the sparkle in her eyes, and I adored her. She was in her 60s, and she had such a wondrous take on life of joy, laughter. And her story was like, whoa! You don't say. She had the nuns, come and look after her. And while she was seeing things crawling up the wall. And
I get it.
Beautiful Irish girl, an author. She was wonderful. And I went to this wonderful meeting in Chelsea. Huge meeting, and it was really, had such good energy. Almost American, had a lot of American people there.
That's cool.
And I after the meeting, I thought, I'm going to ask her, as God's will. She's going to bat me away, but I'm going to ask. And she said yes.
Oh, nice.
And she was my sponsor for the next 22 years.
Okay, so God's will for you to have this woman as your sponsor. Did she get you started on the steps right away?
I'd already started, but she said, no, we're going to do it this way. And we did it basically the big book way and kept it simple. I'd already been writing for my other sponsor, my life story for my step 4. I'd already written 10,000 words. And she was like, no, don't want that. I want the 3 columns. And you and I, when you're finished, writing it. We are going to sit down in one session, and that's it.
My goodness.
And so that's what we did.
How did you feel about that? Were you resistant to that after all the work you had done?
No.
So this woman really was a game changer for you, wasn't she?
She was. There was a point when I was doing the fourth step, writing, that I couldn't write anymore. Because what I did with that 10,000 words was that, I continued with it to a certain extent, and then from it, I found how I felt about things, what the actual resentments were, and how I felt about things. But there was a part of it, I was sitting up on my computer, and I was writing out a certain section of my life, and it was breaking my heart, and I had to call my sponsor, and I had to say, she said, "It's all right, darling. I've got a prayer for you." And she gave me this prayer, and she said, "Take time off. For 2 weeks, no. Don't even think about it. Pray each and every day with this prayer." And I went back to it, bam, 2 weeks later, all was good.
Do you remember that prayer?
No, it sits tucked away somewhere in a chest. That got all packed away when I moved house from the big house to my little cottage here. But it's like, Lord, come with me into the dark places, hold my hand. And it was a beautiful prayer.
Yeah.
Every time I called her, anything that was bothering me, she had the wisdom, she had the answer. A few simple words, and everything cleared up. And it's just the act of sharing something with somebody you can trust. It lifts it from you.
So you sat down with her. You have this fourth step in hand. You went through your fifth step. What was that experience like, and how did you feel afterwards?
She sat and she listened. Now, some of it had been so dark. When my ex-husband left, a friend put me onto a spiritual counsellor who was very good. And there were some pages there that I actually shared with him before my sponsor, because they were so dark and I was so ashamed. And he was able to lighten and lift the fear. So she heard everything.
She heard everything.
And she laughed. She didn't fall asleep. And she listened. And we drank tea. And then after 3-4 hours, it was done. And she said, "Right, come into the garden, bring all your pages of your..." And we set fire to it. And the next morning, I had to be up very early. And I was doing a video. I was working as an extra. And do you know, my Lord, I walked into this place full of strangers who I was going to be working with for the next 24 hours. And I felt able to sit down with any of them and just chat, say hello, and be open. There were no barriers anymore between myself and anybody else on the face of the planet. Whereas before, I was too frightened, scared, or whatever.
That's a terrific transformation from doing the fourth step to doing the fifth step, and then the next morning you're okay with the world and willing to do what God would have you do that next day, huh?
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, that is an incredible revelation. For the first time, not to feel a wall between yourself and the rest of the world. To have an honest, open aspect. Now, but you have to work on that each and every day still.
That veil lifted is a real challenge. Let me ask you something. I've known a lot of people in the past who did their fourth steps and then their fifth steps and then they burned them. And then I've heard other people say that it was a good thing they kept their fourth step because when it came time for them to do their eighth and ninth step, they had a frame of reference for that. What was your experience with doing the eighth and ninth step and with regard to having burned your fourth step?
Well, you see, Howard, I still had it on my computer. It was a ritual. It was a ritual.
Okay. So you got all this done, and what was it like for you when you got to your 8th step and your 9th step? What was that experience like?
I did seek out people who I had harmed, and it's like beating heart. For example, one of them, I was working in Fringe Theatre, was doing the Scottish play, and I was a witch, of course I was. And, drive home afterwards. But I had quite a large, wine and beer and whatever, all at home. And so I drank when I got home, and the trouble was that the next day it was one of these 48-hour, and I was still drinking when I should have been setting off for the theatre. So I called up and said, my mother's had a heart attack. I'm at the hospital. An awful lie. Now, that's one of the things that got me into the rooms, that deep, horrible lie. I couldn't bear that. I had to meet up with the 2 directors, and I had to sit them down and had to tell them. And, they were fine. They were sweeties. It was, phew, but to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
But the majority of other people, I had burnt bridges.
Yeah.
And they weren't in my life anymore. But I'd come across them, and I just asked for God's strength and His wisdom and God's will, that if I see that, and then just make an apology.
Yeah.
And, I did that. I remember one chap, he was like, wah, as I sort of came up to him, wah, and I just said, no, calm down, dear, calm down. It's all right. Look, I'm an alcoholic, and I was wild and mad. I'm not an alcoholic anymore, and I just want to apologize for all of my very bad behaviour. And the look of relief and the smile on his face, it's worth it. So
as you were moving forward through the steps, was your sponsor preparing you for the service work that you would encounter at the 12th step? And what did that service work look like for you? Sponsorship or other things that your sponsor had you do?
And service, I was so joyful when I first got sober. But then I took myself off to the street. That was one of the 1990, and that became my home group.
Okay.
And the first time they said, we need someone to sweep. I'll sweep the floor. And then it was, we need somebody to I'd do the tea. I'd do the cakes. And then there's a beautiful ladies' meeting that I would go to. And they needed...
Nice.
Since I had 2 years, I'd be a treasurer. I'll do the literature, and always it became really important to me.
So you were a real service worker. You were a trusted servant of the groups that you were part of.
The best thing about service is you interact. It's about interact. I didn't know how to interact in real life. I never had. That's one of the reasons alcohol was my medicine. It enabled me to talk to people.
Yeah.
From that first time when I went to that meeting in West Hollywood, and that guy went, hey, who are you? And he shoved his hand in my face and was big and beautiful. I knew what service meant. It meant making welcome people.
Yeah, that is so important.
Thinking about somebody else before yourself. And serving people biscuits and cups of tea is a joy. Especially, me, I arrange those biscuits beautifully, baby. It's wonderful.
It's a great way to get to know and be known in a group is doing service work.
Yes.
So in addition to the service work, what were some of the other things that drew you closer to AA and the fellowship itself?
The closest to AA was my own conscious contact with my God, and hearing Him in people's honesty and their truth blew me away, that I wasn't the only person in the world who peed the bed.
That's a good way to put it.
Whoa, that gentleman up there in the suit looking so cool, he peed the bed. Yeah.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. When did you have that first realization of that conscious contact with others to God? I mean, what you're talking about is other people's experience triggering that conscious contact in God for you. When did that first occur?
When I heard a nun at a ladies' meeting, I don't know. It was just her humility. I think God spoke to me when I was at that very first meeting, which, failed me. I'm sorry, but it failed me. But when I heard that this is not your fault, this is a disease, that was something. I'd known all about God growing up. When I was a wee nipper, I was adopted when I was 18 months old because I was born in the 50s and my mother tried to keep me. She was unmarried though, and there was no help from the state. She was a pariah of society and she tried to keep me, but she was working. I was put into a day nursery where I caught scabies, and she had to give me up.
Yeah.
And I went to two really good, decent, honest, working-class people, Stan and Alice. Oh, good people. And that was God's intervention. Simple, good people. And from a young age, I went to Sunday school. I heard all about Jesus, and I liked that very much. Several years later, I'm 11 years old, I'm still in junior school, and there was a couple of girls outside our school gates, and just over the way was the mission. And they were handing out pamphlets. And the next Sunday, I took myself off to their Sunday school, because I'd stopped going to the other one. And I went, and I joined a Christian Endeavour group. They're all older than me. And I just asked Jesus, come into my heart. And it was the, a first real conscious contact with a higher power. It filled my heart, and all was well, all was beautiful. It was wonderful.
And this was when you were, what, you said 10, 11 years old at this time, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier about 12 being a turning point somewhere along the way for you, huh?
Yeah, and I did give myself over. Unfortunately, I didn't give over my will, not one bit, because this sort of adopted child, whose mother had suddenly vanished at 18 months, and who had never felt a part of anybody or anything. My first sort of alcoholic drink was stolen money. And my mum and dad would have a nip of sherry, small sherry glass of sherry, every Christmas Day and every New Year's Day. And they'd let me have a tiny nip as well. And I was looking after a neighbour's cat, and she had a bottle of Sanatogen, which is a sort of a sherry. It's good for you. It's more of a medicine, and I'd had a few mouthfuls of that, and I liked it. So I had stolen money, and I went and bought myself a bottle of sherry.
At 12, you were able to just go buy a bottle of sherry?
I went to a local place. I said, it's for Mum and Dad. They've sent me to buy. And, Angel, when I look innocent, I look innocent. And I'm a wonderful liar. And what Mum and Dad and I used to do as I was growing up, on a Saturday, we'd get on a bus and we'd go shopping somewhere. We'd go either west, east, north, south. We'd go to Portobello Road, Kensington High Street, Shepherd's Bush Market, loved Shepherd's Bush Market, Hammersmith, King Street, all local areas, just a bus ride away. And it'd be like our afternoon out. But now I was 11 and I was going to my Christian, and doing this, and I'm like, oh, I won't, I won't be coming out shopping with you. Oh, that's all right then, You stay at home, you'll be all right. And I went to a little back room, a little dining room, and from the cabinet, which smelt of mothballs, I took out a sherry glass, and I took it upstairs, and I poured out that first glass of sherry, all mine. I had a whole bottle as well, and I drank it. Wham! All the fears, all the alienation, they're all gone away. Yeah. Further along, I was like 2 miles away on Kew Bridge, and I had not a clue how I had got there. And then I got home again. That was a bit befuddled. There was the empty bottle of sherry on the floor in my bedroom.
My goodness.
And that was my first blackout. My first real drink was to black out.
How did you feel after that happened? Were you anxious to do it again, or were you scared? What was the feeling at that point?
I felt quite sick, but it didn't stop me. At the same time, I didn't go seeking it. But many incidences followed where I would drink to blackout. And the funny thing was that on my 13th birthday, I was going to a disco, and my parents knew all about it. It was up in London, and I was going with people. I lied, I was going alone. And when I got home, I hadn't drank that night. It hadn't been that sort of thing. I got home, and they saw sticking out of my bag a packet of cigarettes.
Oh, no.
All hell broke loose. That I was smoking. Oh, my Lord. Now, I had come home already at this time, once or twice, paralytically drunk, and been sick all over my bed. They never said a word.
They never said anything about that?
No, but the cigarettes, boom. I don't think they understood. They didn't drink, and their family had drank.
Did they attribute the paralytic state and the mess in the bed to something else, or did they just not understand that's what happened when someone drank the way you did?
They didn't understand that.
Huh, that's interesting. So you got taken to task for the cigarettes.
Yes.
What was the outcome of that? What was it? What were your consequences?
Well, I'd met a very beautiful girl who's 2 years older than me, and she became my absolute demon. In every way.
Your demon.
She taught me the dark side of life. And when I was 13, we ran away from home together. My parents didn't have a bank account. This is 1970. They kept all the money for the gas man, the money for the electricity, the rent money, and all of that in the wardrobe, locked up in glass jars. I smashed open the wardrobe. I took most of that money.
And you took off?
And I took off with this girl.
How long were you gone?
Just a week. We went all the way from Chiswick, 8 miles into Soho. Because, this was at the fag end of, the hippies, man. We also had the skinhead revolution, the first skinhead, not two-tone, not madness, not all that music. This was 10 years before. And so I was a skinhead and I was a hippie man. This is at 13 years old. Because I was a total dichotomy. I wanted everything. I wanted the good, the bad, the light, the dark. I wanted to taste everything. And it was all this big search for love, for affirmation. And I loved dressing up.
At 13?
Yeah. So we ran away from home, and my parents took me back after that. But, it didn't get better. I was drinking. When I drank, and I was bunking off school. And when I was 14, they gave up on me. I ran away again. This time, I ended up staying with a friend, and her mother fostered me. Beautiful woman.
So from the time you were 14 until How old were you fostered by her?
Not for a very long time. And so then I went into a children's home.
How long were you there?
18 months.
18 months. So you're talking about being almost, 16 or so when you get out of the children's home?
Yeah, I actually left to get married. I was engaged to be married to a very lovely man. Boy.
At 16?
At 15. I was going to get married on my 16th birthday.
So what happened?
I got cold feet and ran away to Edinburgh with a gay boy. He is the same age as me, and he had a sugar daddy who rented a beautiful flat for us.
So you were kind of on your own by this time, huh?
Oh, yeah. I was on the streets from 15, really. I had bedsits and I had flats, but quite a lot of the time I was just staying with people. Not a lot. A little bit. I could get my life together and really build a good life.
Right.
I'd have a flat, a bedsit.
Right.
I'd have a job. I would do well. But I had this cycle, and that was 18 months. The 18 months here, 18 months there.
Yeah, it's a pattern, isn't it?
After 18 months, I would blow everything, lose everything through alcohol. I had my first rock bottom when I was 15. That was, before my 16th birthday.
What happened?
I'd got my first job leaving school.
Yeah.
And it's the first time I'd earned money. And I very, very quickly learned how to steal without being found out. And with the money I stole and the money that I earned and the beautiful clothes I was able to buy and the wonderful makeup and, it was so lovely. I would have loved to have carried on there. But with that money, I could buy alcohol as well. Now I could really drink.
So all this is happening in your middle teens, and then you mentioned that you got married at 23. So let's say from the time you didn't get married when you were 16 till 23, what did that period of look like in your life?
I suppose we could center around 76. I'd taken myself back to college because I'd left school at 15. But academically, I was very good. Because I'd been expelled from one school. But the second school that I went to, the only school that would take me, which was strictly secondary modern, but the teachers were wonderful. They had to work their asses off to get through to a lot of dysfunctional kids there. And English was a second language to the majority of them. But it was a rocking school, and I loved it.
Right.
I left school, and all my teachers said, don't. We'll write you really good reports as like CVs for you. But I thought, I've got to go back. And I went to college, which was like to get O-levels and go on. And then I was going to go to art school.
Yeah.
And I was going to that. And I was still going to parties and going out. I didn't have any huge alcoholic outages at that time because I was really keen on my studies. But I went to one party and I met this lovely chap. And I thought, no, I don't fancy him, but I like this man. He makes me laugh. And we got on so very well. So, we exchanged telephone numbers and got in touch with each other. And he said, oh, look, my best friend, he's playing. Now, this is March 1976. And the band was the Sex Pistols. He took me along. This is about the third gig they'd ever done. Totally blew me away. The energy, the anger, it totally spoke to exactly how I felt. I'd already done a lot of self-harming, and this had been from 13 years old. And that anger and that fury, I'd tried being violent with other people. Yeah, I'm going to beat you up. Don't like it.
Sure.
Don't like hurting other people. But I found that I could really hurt myself with anything, broken, whatever. And broken glass, it doesn't matter, but it let the rage, the fear, everything just drain away. And I would be in a kind of a limbo for 1 or 2 weeks afterward, because they were always quite serious. Watching this band, this music perform, it was incredible, and I promptly broke a glass, but it didn't end well. The cutting that I had done, I had to be drunk to do it. Like my first ever one when I was 15. It's the endorphins, and I continued to do it from, say 15 right up until 35 before I got sober. The summer of 76. At that time I was working to pay my way through college, because I was back at college. I was working in a wonderful pub in North London, near where I lived. And we had the best people come in. I'm 18, I'm a wonderful barmaid, because I will remember what you're drinking, my dear, and have it ready for you the moment you walk through that door. And, with the background, I didn't drink when I did that job until the end. But I'd been there for like a year. And that's getting through college. And very rarely did I drink to black out at that time. Kind of good time. I loved my studies. But
it was always right there then, wasn't it? You weren't drinking while you were bartending and hanging out with these folks.
Not when I was at college.
Right.
But I was known as Mad Jane throughout that community for that time.
All this is going on within a period of how many years?
2 years. We'd been arrested one night, and this is the last night that I worked. It's a drought that summer, and basically there was no draft beer. There was only bottled beer, and draft beer was suddenly back. It was back, and we all got wasted. I had them at the bar. They were giving me 50p's, and I was giving them loads of drink. We all got really drunk, and we got so drunk that we used to walk home, and we decided that we would steal a truck. Not one of us could drive.
Jeez.
That the truck was actually up. It had no wheels on it. We didn't notice. Oh, we're just sitting, go away. And he smashed up the telephone box instead. And so then the police came, and they took all of us away. And I said, don't put me in a cell.
Yeah.
I said, don't put me in a cell. They put me in a cell, and I was very drunk. And the thick wired glass, like frosted glass, and it's got wired. I smashed it. I was able to smash it with my fist. And I cut a huge thing on my arm. And I said, you better let me out, because I'm bleeding. And they let me out. They took me to hospital, where I was stitched up and then wrapped up. And they took me back to the police station. They put me back in the cell. So I just simply ripped off all the bandages and ripped out all the stitches and said, don't do that again. And then back to the hospital. Yeah. And then they wouldn't put me back in the cell after that. I was quite wild. I remember all of that night. I didn't black out. What happened was, though, and I didn't know till years later, that we had a few days before our court appearance. And I'm very, I had this lovely skirt that I'd made. It's like a 50s skirt, beautiful fabric, and a little white blouse. And along I go, and we all go to, I had been misled. Poor, she had been misled. I don't know, I don't remember that court case at all. But no, I had been misled, and they were the bad boys. So the cutting that I had done...
Okay. That's an addiction, isn't it? The cutting, isn't it?
Oh, God, yes. It's the endorphins and everything that it gives you. And it is... I continued to do it. It was part of my addiction. And it was always done when I was drinking.
So you were cutting, you were hanging out with these people. When you were 23, you got married, and then that marriage lasted for 15 years. So after 15 years of marriage, you had stopped cutting. Was that at the same time that you stopped drinking?
The two went together. They really did.
Do you think you could have stopped cutting if you hadn't come into AA?
I had stopped, I think, about a year or so before.
You had stopped, but I mean, do you think you could have stayed stopped if you hadn't gone into AA and you'd kept on drinking?
Oh, no, I had started cutting my neck and other parts. So that probably would have been how I died.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Alcohol and a sharp object, and
Yeah.
I mean, there were great intermissions in between. It wasn't a continual thing.
Yeah.
But it was a huge build-up of everything, and to let it all go, it would flow out of me with the blood. It really was a release. It was wonderful. It was never suicidal. It was never that. It was a fury.
Yeah. So between the time that you got sober 26 years ago and, let's say, the more recent history, in the 26 years that you've been sober, have you had the opportunity to interact with and be of service to other women who have been cutters?
I've offered that help.
Yeah. What have you found along the way?
I've offered that help where it's been there. It's never been taken up. And I wouldn't know why.
Huh. Why do you
I don't know, because I've got a funny haircut. I don't know.
Yeah,
I still retain a lot of what I learnt in punk, and it's an individuality. And I shave, half my head simply because it works for me. I like it.
Yeah, I get that.
And I've offered help to ladies who cut, or anyone.
Yeah.
It's not a sex thing. It's not a gender thing. But it's never been taken up.
That's really interesting. When you share, do you talk about it very much? I mean, do people know it's an integral part of your story?
Not often. I will refer to it. If I'm doing a chair, I won't go into huge detail, but it started with, that first girl. We'll call her Tina. That's her name, who I ran away with.
Sure.
And she had just described to me how one night she was so sad, and it was raining, and she was leaning on her bedroom window looking out at the tree as the rain was falling, and she'd cut and the blood had dripped, and she made it sound beautiful. And it was later, when I had a few drinks, that very soon afterwards, that, and I was on the run at this time, I was away without leave on the streets of Earl's Court, safe in the gay community, because, I'd already been raped. I'd lost my virginity to that.
Yeah. And
that was at her hand. She had actually held my hand while it happened when I was 13.
Yeah.
And so I preferred a gay community because it was safe. They weren't going to touch me. I was safe.
So the drinking and the cutting went hand in hand. Since you've been in AA, have you been able to come to terms with what the cutting was all about in your life?
Oh, yeah. I absolutely understand it. It was, I had to release the anger. Another way I released myself, as it were, or was true to myself, was music. And that's why I taught myself to play bass over 18 months.
And
then that actually led to, being in a band with boys, but they didn't want me to write songs. And I thought, well, fuck you. And so I formed an all-girl band, and we wrote our own songs. We all wrote songs. We all, and we toured America twice. Houston, I've been there, played there. Did a radio show in Houston as well. Can't remember what it was called. Yes.
In the past several years, have you been involved with music again?
No.
You've been sober a long time now. What have been some of the enriching things that have happened for you in the last 5 years?
Just living life sober.
Yeah.
And working, keeping alive.
Right.
I don't have a lot of money, but I do have my own little cottage. It's all paid for. That's such a blessing. And just living life, and one day at a time being sober. Getting through the pandemic, thank God for Zoom. Oh my Lord, thank God for Zoom.
Are you going back to live meetings yet?
Not yet, no. I've worked all throughout. I've had to go out and work because I'm front line. I sell fruits and vegetables. I'm a grocer. But, That's one of the sort of occupations that you have to work.
Yeah. How do you feel about going back to live meetings at this point?
Oh, I look forward to it.
Yeah.
But I still love my Zoom.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. Well, that was one of the reasons why I was so glad when you said you would do this, because I knew that we could do it through Zoom. I knew that you and a number of other people I love over there have been cooped up for a really long time, and I'm really glad that going to some of the meetings I've gone to in Great Britain has really enriched the quality of my program over the last year.
It has for me. All the different, and it's wonderful. I love, like, zooming into America, as it were.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. I love it.
You know, one of the things I like to ask kind of towards the end of these interviews, it's more of a contemplative question, but if the Jane of today, knowing what you know today, could go back and talk to that 13 or 15 or 16-year-old Jane, and you could pull her aside to give her a little bit of advice, knowing what you know now, what would you tell her?
You will be loved. You will be loved. But live your life. I can't change that because it's made me who I am today. I can't deny her. Because despite all of the madness and insanity, I was able to bring forth my dreams. As a musician, I went to art school when I was 50, and that was through AA and being sensible, whatever.
Yeah, of course.
I've acted on stage. I lived my dreams. None of them were successful in the sense that I could make a living from them in the end.
Right.
And I would say to her, you will be loved.
Yeah.
And I can't tell her anything else because through DNA, having that tested, I found that, my mother committed suicide. I found this out 11 years ago. AA got me through it. After she gave me up, she went on to have another child. And when he was 17, he had a motorbike accident and died.
Oh, dear.
And a year later, she put a plastic bag over her head and tied it up with a silk scarf and died. And I only found this out through Facebook. I just put out a very cryptic thing on a genealogy page. And this woman, obviously adept at finding, because I'd been searching for my mother for all of my married life. All the time that I was together with my husband, he helped me search. We couldn't find anything. But I found out all about her. I got the coroner's report. She'd been a manic depressive. She'd been in Guernsey during the occupation of the Nazis. That's how she grew up. And she'd had tuberculosis, which can lead to like chronic depression.
Sure.
And I realized then, I did a chair a few weeks after I found this out, and it hit me. This woman who I had obsessed about, that was also a part of my pain, the yearning to know her, was that I wasn't my mother. And 4 years ago I had my DNA tested and it all came back. Basically, you can sign up and say, yes, people can get in contact with me if they're like a first cousin or whatever. They can send an email. It's up to me if I reply. And suddenly I'm getting first cousin sort of testings, other people's DNAs. And it ended up, I've got a sister, a sibling. I was my father's wild oats in the 50s. He's an Irish man from Donegal. And he'd come over to London and, there he was. He sewed me, as it were. I don't know what happened between them, whether it's a love affair or what. I know nothing. But then he went back to Ireland, then to New York to join his 4 brothers, and they had a bar in New York, and he got married, and he's got his eldest daughter, is my little sister, and I've got 2 little brothers in New York. She's in Washington, they're in New York.
Have you met them yet?
Oh, yeah, on Zoom. And, face-to-face, lots of emails. And I was going to go and stay with them, but then we got COVID. Oh.
Yeah, sure. Right.
So I saved all of my money, and when this is all settled down, then I will go and meet my family. Real family.
What an incredible story. This is what sobriety has brought into your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, so that's why I go back to that 13-year-old and I say, you will be loved. I can't tell her anything else. She's got to find out for herself.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to wrap this up, with that sentiment and your heartfelt gratitude that I can sense for AA and your involvement over the last 26 years. You're really a beautiful person. I love you. And
oh, Lord, yes.
You've just done a wonderful job of laying out just an incredibly extraordinary life that has led you to being right where you are. And I'm looking at you right now on the screen, and you look very relaxed and satisfied. And that's the best thing you can say about a person who's in AA, is they're relaxed and satisfied and
comfortable
in their own skin. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
But I can look back on all of my life, see that it's remarkable. Yes, dark and wild, violent, nasty, but also AA has brought me closer and has taught me how to live with humans. And it's enriched my spiritual life where I live with God.
That's such a beautiful way to end here, Jane. Thank you so much for doing this. This has been marvelous, and I really appreciate your taking the time to sit down with me and share your life. Again, many thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Shut up now.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thanks again to Jane P. for sharing her story, and thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Listen to all the interviews of this podcast by following us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to hear every show to date. If you want to email me directly, it's howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. This podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.